And I'll introduce you guys in just a second, but I wanted to give a little background on sort of where this came about and why we decided to do this. Last year we did, and I think maybe there were a few of you here, for the last startup. It was sort of a competition last year, but it really wasn't. We weren't really sure what to do with it. And it kind of came out of that we wanted to share the experience of some people who have actually started companies and give a little bit more insight into what to do when you're starting a company. So really the focus of this panel is sort of some of the considerations you should take into place as you're starting a company and questions that might come up. Well, let's go ahead and kick it off now. Just for the folks who just came in, I gave a little bit of background on sort of where this came from. And last year's startup events were really sort of not well defined, and we kind of had a lot of different ideas coming out of that about what to do with the startup side of Source. And so one of the things, it was a panel where folks who have already started companies or were in the process of starting companies could come and share their experiences. So without further ado, I'll introduce Raphael Marty, and we'll just go down the line and kind of give a little bit of background on where you're coming from.
All right, hello everybody. I started a company last year. We incorporated in September. The company is called Loggly. I'm breaking out a little bit of this, out of the security space of that company, but it's basically a SaaS-based offering for log management. I have worked in this space for quite a while. I was at ArcSight before and at Splunk, so I kind of knew what space I'm going into, so it's not completely new for me. Yeah, we took a round of investment last December, a very small investment so that we can actually live. We're actually, right now, we had a term sheet on the table, and hopefully by the end of the week that's going to be signed and we're going to get some more money. And then with that, hopefully grow the company quite a bit. I think I'll leave it at that, so it gives you kind of an idea of what I do.
Okay. Rob Shane?
My name is Rob Shane. So I began my career hacking VCRs with soldering irons on the Commodore Amiga, which is a lot of fun. Doing a lot of software development, and that shifted into systems integration and eventually to security. So I've been doing just security for the past 12 years. I've worked for...
Anton, I told you there's no ED in here.
So these two have worked together for quite a while.
We've clearly worked together for a while. I'm going to punch you in a second. So over the last 12 years, I worked for 4 different security startups, the most notable of which is AtStake. I was one of the founding members of AtStake and helped develop some of the methodologies for how to do architecture and design reviews that we used all throughout the company. Also did code reviews and pen tests and pretty much a little bit of everything that could be done there, including, I think I interviewed about half the company. I wrote LC4, a version of LoftCrack, and I also worked on a project called UDS, which was Undeveloper Studio, which became SAFE, which is Security Architecture Framework, which became Veracode. So I worked on that team for a year. And then eventually started training, and the rest was history. At that point, I realized that I could fix the problem before it happened. So after doing the teaching thing for a few years, I decided to spin off my own company, and SafeLight Security Advisors is me. So you see that on the badges. And I think that's enough to start.
Okay, my name's Paul Davis. I've had 4 companies over the years. Software House in the UK, which was also a service provider before service providers existed. And security consulting recently, and another security consulting company, and another one. So I suppose I'm starting another few. And some have been successful, some have been a journey, but don't regret it. But definitely every time, lessons learned about yourself and about how you do business.
My name is Eugene Kuznetsov. About 10 years ago, I started a company called Data Power that was a pioneer in the application-oriented networking space, and one of our most successful products was an XML security gateway. The company was acquired by IBM. I stayed at IBM for a couple of years as an executive, and one of my roles there was actually to look at startups that were coming in, looking to partner with Big Blue or looking to be acquired. So it was very interesting to first be in a small company as a founder of a startup, trying to partner with big companies, raising quite a bit of venture capital, and then later being on the inside and watching how the big company executives think about startups that are coming in the door. And then since leaving IBM, I've been involved as an advisor or board member with a number of companies, probably half to two-thirds of them security companies, as well as being co-founder of an online privacy startup.
Okay. And so, with that, how many folks in the room have started a company or thinking about starting a company? By a show of hands. Okay, so there's quite a few people here who either have, and those of you who have already. A few, less, yeah. So I guess at some point you have to decide that you're going to actually go ahead and start the company. And so what is that thought process in terms of do you take your prior work or is it some idea that you're looking for? Where did Safe Light Security Advisors come from? I mean,
so for me it was easy because I had been doing the training thing for a while. I knew that how the business model worked. I really understood the intricacies of doing, showing up on site and teaching and getting paid for that. We shifted the model a little bit because I realized that didn't scale very well. So the thought process was, all right, well the service thing is cool, but I want something that scales. So we decided to do we have e-learning products. So we built e-learning products because those you can just sell a number of them and just you collect the check, and that's fantastic because that scales really well. So we kind of envisioned that, and then just kind of went from there. As far as the stepping off process, it was really scary at first because that was the first one I'd started from scratch, where I actually had to go out and you figure out how do you incorporate this thing and how do you do all the things that are involved in getting it going. And to me, that the best analogy I can come up with, it's like that scene in Indiana Jones where he had to step off the cliff and close his eyes and just hope he didn't fall and plummet to his death. It's kind of like that, and you just take it one step at a time and you just go from there.
Hey, Rafi, you're in the process of really starting Loggly now. What was that process like?
It was definitely incredibly scary in the beginning, but I had a lot of help, which was my previous employer laid me off. So it was actually fairly easy. I was thinking about starting my own thing like a year and a half ago. I started more kind of coming up with the concept, started writing a business plan. I didn't really know what business plan is back then, but you do some internet searching and Googling and you find some templates and you figure out, oh, it's interesting, these questions that come up. And I had about 50% done when the actual layoff happened, and I kind of started talking to my company, like, where is this going? What's my role in 6 months? And they're like, well, where do you want to be? And I'm like, well, I want to start a company at some point. So when the layoffs happened, they were like, well, it's time for you to go. We would like to help you, but this is really kind of the push over the cliffs that you had to take yourself was kind of done for me. And it was awesome. That was the best thing that happened to me. I'm super happy it happened that way. It took quite a while to actually get to the point where I incorporated and actually got Loggly off the ground. I started something else first, where I wanted to build this visualization service in the cloud, and that turned out it's really hard to build. And then we kind of moved this into the direction of Loggly. So it was kind of an evolution towards this. And from there on, it's been smooth sailing so far. Keep our fingers crossed, but things have been going really well.
And so one of the biggest considerations there is money, right? How are you able to do that, without going bankrupt or like living in a box? So one of the things we talked about prior to the panel here was, do you go out and look for VC right away, or do you try and bootstrap the company like you have, Rob? And Paul, I don't know in your experience if you.
I've never gone down the VC route. Usually the companies are started because of opportunities of a pipeline of business coming in.
Sure.
It just makes sense that way.
And Eugene, with Data Power.
I bootstrapped early on, but then eventually we ended up raising about $25, $28 million in venture capital. So
Okay.
it was substantial VC money.
And so what was that process like, where you went out and started pitching it to companies, or did they come to you, or?
Well, you go and you get introductions to the right venture capitalists, and then you go have a lot of meetings. And the meetings are frustrating because sometimes they have the right kind of background, especially when it comes to the security market, and sometimes they really don't. And so you can get into very lengthy discussions with very little content.
It's kind of like dating, but more painful.
Yeah, the people, anyway. Let's just not go there. But that said, it actually is valuable. I mean, the discipline of going into meetings time and time again with smart, knowledgeable business people and having to give your pitch again and again really teaches you how to sell both your company and yourself and the product. So while it can be very frustrating and it's not appropriate for all startups, and some startups really shouldn't raise capital, they don't need to, and it makes sense. For those that do, it actually can be a very useful training experience for the founders.
And it definitely also helped me refining my business plan, right? Because every time you walk in there, you have these smart people across from you, you tell them something, and you realize, well, hang on a second, that doesn't quite add up. So you go back, you change it, and next time you present, it's a little better, and it's a little better. So it definitely helps. And they have good feedback too, right?
Yeah, we didn't raise any VC funding, but we did go and do investor pitches for smaller folks because we were just trying to raise a small amount of seed money. And the process, it's like Rafi said, every time you do it, you see what works, what doesn't work, and you see if they kind of go, then you change that part of the presentation for next time. And over time, it does help you get your act together. If nothing else, it gets your act together. Because if you don't present yourself the way everybody else is presenting themselves, they're going to just throw you out of the room. So you have to write at least a little bit of a business plan, and you have to have some structure and logic to what you're doing.
I mean, the elevator pitch of how you position your company is very, very important. To be able to present your message precisely about what we're going to do, how you differentiate yourself and the value, and down to the revenues and how you're going to do your business model is so important. So even if you're starting up a business, think about the discipline of doing the VC exercise.
And how
VCs were haters. Right?
How formalized should that be? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but does that need to be a sheet of paper, or is that like you think through it at a certain point, or?
You have to document it. I'm sorry, you have to write it down and you have to have it really nicely done. It's not something you can do in the back of a piece of paper. It has to be a formal document because it's like everything. If you're a developer, if you develop on the fly, it doesn't work. You have to document it, you have to build it, you have to plan out the architecture so that you're not fixing problems on the fly. But you'll still get it wrong. You'll still make mistakes and get the feedback and somebody say, well, are you sure that's going to work? What's the value proposition there?
What I discovered is first I thought, well, I have to write this like 10, 15 page business plan and an executive summary along with that. And then you have the VC pitch deck with like 8 slides, however many you have, and you go pitch the VCs with that. I realized I never was asked for a business plan. I was always asked for the VC pitch deck. So you have to have a really solid deck that goes through all the important things, and you need to know what to say to it. It's not just the bullets you have on there, but you need to make sure you have thought to it. And it helps to write the business plan around that because it makes you think about it. But I never had to show anyone a formal plan or anything, not at our stage of the company.
Yeah, the pitch deck is definitely way more important because that's what your people are going to see. But the business plan behind it, really, at least a 1 to 5 pager is critical because it's kind of like trying to build a house without a blueprint. If you have a vision but you don't actually document, where the frames go and where you have to nail things down, it's just not, you're not going to know where you're going. You're going to start off in a direction, and I heard a quote recently, it was hilarious. The only thing worse than going in the wrong direction is going in the wrong direction enthusiastically. That's kind of where you get without a plan.
Sure. And so is the, and Rafi, you're in the process of doing this now, but going out and talking to VCs, and Eugene, maybe you can answer this better than anyone. Is the market good right now for certain types of things? I mean, there's certainly a lot of cloud services being started up, and Loggly being one of them.
So, the market is a lot better now than it was a year and a half ago, right? With the general, credit crunch, most of the VC firms had really stopped investing in new ventures about a year and a half ago, and so a few things were getting done, but it was very, very bad fundraising climate. Now it's improved again. I think people are seeing the opportunity, both in cloud and in enterprise infrastructure in general. And that traditionally is good for security firms because the history of security startups is that you can invest in them and you can get a good return and a good multiple on revenue because there are many potential acquirers. So I think that the environment for security startups right now is still very good and certainly much better than it was say a year or 2 years ago.
Sure.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yes, John.
Oh, of course, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think it's always skewed and it's always moving from one thing onto another as technology shifts and as the IT spending priorities shift. So it was just an overall statement. You're right. There's always differences, that can change almost on a month-by-month basis. If there's an acquisition that's really hot, or some VC, plows $15 million into a particular company, everyone else all of a sudden decides that yes, JPEG virus filtering is the number one investment opportunity. And it'll be something else the following month.
Right, and there's trade-offs too, right? I mean, when the economy is down, there may not be as much access to funding, but there's also tremendous access to talent. So if you can find people that just got laid off that maybe you can partner with, maybe they have a nice runway that you can use, you can partner with them, give them stock instead of cash, and you can start the company that way, and then when the economy comes back up, then as you start getting revenues, then you start paying them, and it all works out well. If timing works out.
And so you touched on something interesting there. How do you find a team to start folks with, or do you do it yourself? Or does it depend?
Never
on
do
the
it
situation?
yourself.
Okay.
Since I guess I threw that out there. Probably the most important lesson I've learned is teamwork. There's no I in team. I happened to, when I left my last job, one of my guys came with me to be an equal partner, and then it just worked out 2 weeks before we started. One of my old buddies from CSC called me up and said, "Hey, I heard you're starting a company. I want to do sales and operations and marketing stuff." And I'm like, "Oh, wow, that's exactly what I don't want to do." Great. So he jumped in, and it was the best thing ever because the three of us, Paul is more technical, Mike is more business, and I kind of float between the two. And having that balanced team has worked out phenomenally for us. And I think looking for that team that can cohesively, you fill in each other's gaps as best you can. That's probably the best.
And so is that always a good split? You've got your business side and then you've got the technical side?
It can be. I think a lot of times what you need to do is, if you're going to start a startup, you got to be real. Even if you're a technical person, you're going to have to learn how to do the business stuff. If you're going to be, if you're going to run a company, the language of business is accounting, and if you have to know how to read a balance sheet and cash flow statement and those kinds of things. So there is a learning curve no matter what, but
sure.
If your main skill is not, I'll give you an example. If it were up to me to write the paychecks, we'd never get paid, right? Because that's not my skill set. So, you find people that can complement your skills and have them do those things that you're not great at.
Sure.
I actually, not totally contrary point to this, but I think you have to be absolutely super careful with who you're choosing as your partners. You are on the phone with them more than with anyone else. I'm on Skype probably like 5 hours a day with one of my business partners, and we're just working. It's kind of like we're in the same office. It's just Skype is open, but we're working from home. So you're spending an incredible amount of time with these guys, and if you don't chime really well, it's going to create tension. It's more than just having a coworker somewhere. The other thing is that you have to be a little careful about is if you're founding a company and you're equal co-founders, think about the equity you keep in the company. So if you already split it 3 ways in the beginning, and then you get some venture funding, and you get another venture funding, think about how much you end up with and whether you're happy at that point. So just keep that in mind. That's something that really, versus 2 versus 3 versus just yourself, they're trade-offs.
And Rob, I know you have a sort of an interesting model about sort of figuring out how much you need to make every year in order to, sort of figure out where you want to be. And we've talked about this before. Yeah. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit in terms of, just figuring out how much you need to make.
Sure. So, if you're trying to start off and you're starting from scratch, what I did is I literally opened up a notebook and I said, all right, at $100,000 a year, what would the business model look like? At $500,000, that was just, can I live on this? $500,000, $1 million, and I actually did that mapping all the way up to like $25 million. And for each bracket I chose, I said, how many of each? What's my magic number? How many units of either product or service do I have to sell each year? And is that realistic? Do I have a plan to accomplish that? And if your business doesn't even match those basic assumptions, then you shouldn't even start it. I've seen a lot of companies that have gotten hundreds of millions of dollars of venture funding that clearly never did that exercise. Because you kind of do the math and you're like, how can these guys stay in business once the money runs out? And the answer is, they don't.
But that brings up an important point about the model of how you generate. Consulting is a body shop piece. And to be honest, you're going to be okay, you're going to survive, but it's going to be a stress every day. But you've got to work on building assets or something that can sell and keep generating revenue. And
Yes, absolutely.
An asset. Because if you're just going to straight consulting on a body shop, it's tough, the barriers to entry, all the competitive stuff. But if you've got something unique and exciting, and then that probably can be the most important thing, is you can tap into your excitement, your emotions, your energy, because you believe in that thing. And that's what really reflects success. Being passionate about your mission, your vision about doing it. But don't just start off in consulting. Think about a product, a license.
Well, consulting can be a good way to start, though, because if you're trying to bootstrap from nothing and you have nothing to sell, you can sell yourself.
Yeah.
You just got to be careful that you're not selling yourself shut up. You know what I mean? You got to make sure you're not selling so much of your time, though, that you don't have time to go off and build your products and things that you're trying to build ultimately.
That's a hard balance to strike.
It's a really hard balance sometimes to strike.
I'm not saying don't consult. I'm just saying don't fall into the trap of just being consultant.
Well, yeah, you're kind of touching on, in sort of this whole panel came out of the idea of give a lesson or give something back that you've learned that you would never do again, right? And so maybe Eugene and Paul, having some of the most experience here, what's one thing that you would never do again, or that you did that would?
I think maybe two comments. One, to pick up on this point about consulting versus product sales. Another way to think of it is that not all revenue is created equal. If you have a company that generates $1 million a year of top line revenue, there's a big difference in the value of that company. If that's consulting revenue, where you've got 5 people that are just being billed out at 100% of their time, or $1 million of a security product that is being sold as a shrink-wrap, ready product. And just to give you an example, if that company were to be acquired by a big player, they look at a product company. They could easily pay 20 times revenue. They could pay $20 million for that company, and that would be considered normal in the security space. On the other hand, a consulting company is worth maybe 1/2 that. Maybe it's 1.5 times the revenue, maybe it's 1 times revenue. If it's a really special consulting company, maybe it's 2x revenue. So maybe it's worth, somewhere between $500,000 and $2 million. Why? Because when I sat as an executive at IBM, we generated, $45-50 billion a year of consulting revenue. So, and it was pretty well understood how to generate more. Another $1 million or $10 million of consulting revenue was completely irrelevant. Whereas if you looked at a product and it was successful with a small channel, you could say, wow, we could take this $1 million product, add it to our sales force, and this could turn into $50, $100, $500 million a year in a couple of years. And so that's something that gets lost sometimes, is that not all dollars are the same when it comes to how venture capitalists or acquirers look at a company. And then so that's one important lesson. And in the early days of bootstrapping, that was something I really had to understand, that even though I was generating revenue through other activities, people didn't really see any value in it because it wasn't related to the core mission of the company. Mm-hmm. And then the second thing is team is really critical. And when it comes to executive hiring, not co-founders, certainly made some mistakes, and that's something I'm never going to do again, is you be very, very rigid about referencing. And if you're not sure, just don't hire somebody. No matter how much excitement there is about filling a particular slot, just take your time, because it takes a very long time to recover from that and to fix mistakes, and it kind of generates a lot of worries and pains that you don't need to have.
I mean, from my perspective, I tend to have more of an operations background or focus at the moment. But the lessons I've learned is invoice. It might be more exciting to talk to the client or develop something, but once you can invoice, cash flow, is so bloody important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds stupid, but, and this is probably an important thing, is you have to work on your strengths. If you're a technical person who doesn't have that business spark, don't try and be that person. Get somebody in. If you're starting a business by yourself, get somebody to do it first. Don't let the expenses get on top of you, because the work of having to backhaul all your receipts and work out what it does and all that junk, you think it's junk, get somebody else to do it, because it's really painful if you don't do that. So my side is the boring side, which is the reason you're in business. You could be in business for passion, but most of all you want to be in business so you can earn a nice revenue and income. The passion helps, but money is useful. I don't know why, but it is bloody useful. Yeah.
For me, some of my favorite things is really being true, because I was part of a small startup with a good friend of mine, but I was also a loss member until maybe 3 months before at stake came along. And I generated a year, which was a big anniversary for me. But also, I want to hear more about kind of the issues of the small startup and the relationship aspect, because in my own startup, that really was quite intense.
I think that's about the most loaded question you could possibly have asked. So do you have any specific area of that you want to hear about? Because I could go on for about 2 hours about that.
I suppose really the aspects that you touched on, the interrelationship, the issues of the bottom line versus the funding,
All right, so why don't,
value versus value.
all right, so this is being recorded, isn't it, right? All right, so why don't I just do a little brain dump. So At Stake was initially founded by VCs. I was actually working for another startup when I first heard about it, before it was called At Stake and before the Loft was involved, so I was kind of cursorily aware of what was going on. And the day I showed up, I found out, oh, the Loft just joined. I was like, cool. So I got to meet all those guys. And so just as kind of an interesting aspect of what happened there, we got in over time. You know, initially it was like $10 million of funding, but by the time we were done, it was $50 million of funding. So lesson learned there, never invest $50 million in a services company. Not a good model. We got bought for $50 million, so that was a push. So I think some of the lessons that I would pull from that were we should have done something around products. We had all these great researchers that we were not utilizing well, because they were doing all cool research projects, but I don't think we did a really good job of leveraging that into products that we could sell very much. And there was a few things, but there should have been a lot more of that. And there should have been a lot more of taking what they were doing and directly leveraging it in the consulting field, because there was a kind of a pretty interesting dichotomy between the two groups. There was the researchers, and then there was us consultants. And we talked a lot. You know, I hung out with those guys a lot and did a lot of work with them, and that's how I ended up doing Loftcraft and some of that kind of stuff. But the main thing, I guess, is if you're going to hire a bunch of expensive resources, make sure you're leveraging them in the best way possible. Otherwise, it's just a waste of money.
So generate a product from a consultant.
Generate a product from. I mean, having them from a promotional and PR point of view was probably the best thing we possibly could have done. But I just think we could have gotten so much more out of that acquisition.
Okay. Well, I want to come back to this. I don't want
to hijack the.
Rafi, real quick. But Rafi, like one thing that you would either never do again or would definitely do again.
It's hard. It's still very young, but I think what I've seen so far, what we've done, we tried to align ourselves with the best out there. So, for example, very early on in September, we were going to incorporate. Big deal, right? I mean, it's not that hard to form a C corporation and register in Delaware and do all this stuff. But there's actually quite a pile of documents you should have, especially if you go down the route of getting VC money. But even otherwise, you just want to have these things done right. So what we did is we ran up and down the Silicon Valley and we interviewed for lawyers. We went out to friends, said, hey, who do you know that's a corporate attorney that would help us incorporate? Some people were like, this is insane, why would we do that? But we talked to the first guy in the morning, great guy. We loved him, we're like, this is cool. This guy is probably the guy that we're going to end up with. Second guy, not so much, I didn't like him that much, too corporate-y, wasn't that cool. Like, okay, next guy, super cool, even better than the first one. We're like, this is it. We go to the fourth guy. This guy blew everyone else out of the water. We ended up going with him, and he's really a rock star. But I'm now confident that he is the best we could have gotten, or definitely one of the best. And it's been worth it. Although he wasn't much more expensive than all the others, but he has so much experience in this field. Just this year alone, he already did 30 financings. So that tells me this guy knows what he's talking about. If I go to him with a problem, he knows what to do. He knows how to read our term sheets, and he knows what's common practice. He doesn't just know the law, but he also knows what's going through. He knows the VCs. He knows where he can push and where we shouldn't push. And I think that I will try to repeat that wherever we go, that we work with the best out there, even if they are slightly more expensive. In the end, it's going to be worth it.
Sure. Doesn't that bring up the issue of the other community, mentors?
Yes. And I think mentor is an incredibly important topic. Last year actually at Source, I was running around with this idea of starting this visualization service in the cloud, and I pulled quite a bunch of people aside and said, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? Is there a business here? What would you do? And it's been incredible. I mean, there's such an amazing crowd of people here. from CTOs of public companies to founders, people that have a lot of experience, way more than I probably will ever have. But these people have been incredibly useful, and to date I'm still, like, whenever I'm out there, I'm talking to people and asking people. I talk to Paul, I'm like, what do you think? When we talk about stuff. So I think you can never talk enough to other people that have done it and that are willing to help you out.
That actually brings up a really important point, though, because I actually also agree with that. You know, get as many mentors as possible, because the people that have done it know what to do. And one thing I'll throw out there is, there will be, if you start a company, you will have no end of people giving you advice. Most of it is crap. Friends and family and everybody else that thinks they know what they're doing, if they've not actually done it, ignore it, because, or at least take it with a huge grain of salt, because you get a lot of bad advice. You wouldn't believe some of the bad advice we got in the beginning of starting our company. We just got to like, yeah. Let me go talk to someone that's actually done it and see what they think, and then you get better, different advice. So.
I actually disagree with you. I mean, even when you get advice from people who've done it, usually it's wrong.
Fair enough. I mean, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you got to kind of go with what you think is going to work for you, because we actually got advice from people like that had done it that definitely just didn't resonate with what we were doing. So, you know, that's a good point too.
So how do you identify? I mean, like, how do you go about doing that? Gut feeling? I mean,
I think that helps.
Yeah.
You know, Warren Buffett talks about the business gene, and I think that there is, you know, having good gut instinct for these things helps. But when it comes to taking advice from people, just make sure that even if they've been successful and have experience with something that closely matches what you're doing. Sure. Not in terms of the technology, but the type of business. For example, if you're starting a consulting business, don't take advice from somebody who started a products business. They probably are not going to have as much useful things to contribute. If somebody hasn't done a bootstrap business before and comes from more of a VC background, guess what? They're going to really be promoting the idea of you taking VC investment, even though that's not appropriate, and so on and so forth.
I was at a business conference and someone was trying to tell me I should franchise my business. I'm like, come on, dude, really?
And I think the other point is, like, don't go for someone that just accidentally kind of fell into the success route, right? Like, there's a lot of people out there that just got lucky, and that's great. It's good for them, but you might not be that person.
And so I want to switch the model here just a little bit and open it up to the audience, but I'll repeat the question as it comes up. We're recording it. So Josh, with that. So
You really need to, at any given time, when you want to start anything. So earlier someone like, when's the right time to start a business? Now. It's always now. Because at any given time, you can take the state of the art and improve it. So really, at any given time, you have to you collect the advice now as far as what people are saying today, and do your own research. And once you've collected from enough people, you get a sense for what works and what doesn't work. Like, I'll give you a quick example. We had talked initially to different people about how we were going to fund this thing, and a lot of people were trying to get, go the VC route, or definitely don't go the VC route. And what actually worked for us is something that most people have never even heard of, which is convertible notes. If you take, it's a loan that says at the end of the loan term, it's going to convert into preferred stock. And that actually worked really well for us, and we were able to raise money with that. And we had tried some other things first that didn't work at all. Didn't get a hit, even a single hit. So sometimes you just have to take what's out there and try different things too, experiment.
The other thing is we talked about mentors. You also have to set yourself something like a big audacious goal. You have to set yourself a goal of getting somebody who is a real recognized expert. Don't just go for your buddies and your friends and people say, well done, isn't it exciting? Don't do that. They're going to give you the good news. Get somebody who is recognized. Now don't stalk them. Okay, no stalking, no sexual friending. This is a business relationship. But they're going to want to be a mentor. They're going to be recognized, and they're going to be an industry leader. And you go after that person, and you build a relationship with them, so that they will sit down with you once a month, once a quarter, and you can talk about your problems. They don't need to be necessarily totally aligned with your business, but they have to understand the business models.
Okay. And so, Josh, your question specifically about essentially it was the landscape is changing really fast. And is that in terms of VC money, or in terms of just the overall technology, or? Sure. Right.
One of the things I have seen in the VC market is the size of the investments is a lot smaller. They're spreading their risk across a much wider portfolio. So you're not going to see the multi-million-dollar things. They're going to be wanting to see a little bit more proof, but they'll give you money to test the water if you've got a good plan. But the initial seedings aren't big. They are spreading. I think you're seeing them as well.
Yeah, that's definitely the same thing.
And Eugene, I mean, do you have any thoughts on that in terms of, is the advice?
Yeah, I think sometimes that happens. I think it's probably more frequent that people don't understand the difference between sectors. I think oftentimes you get bad advice because of that, not because of changes in time. But look, the fundamentals of business don't change. You kind of have to separate the current business cycle and what the public markets are doing from the realities of just things that have been true for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And I think that takes experience, and good mentors will know that and say, well, I don't know what the multiple is today, but let's go look it up.
Right.
And people who are not as experienced or just not as smart, frankly, are going to give you bad advice inside of date.
Right, and one of the things that a lot of people overlook is if you're going to start a business and you want to, make a lot of money, you have to be adding some value to the marketplace. If you're not actually adding any value, then you're selling air, and eventually that's not going to work out. And a lot of companies have learned that the hard way. And that's one of those things that we've learned over and over again for thousands of years, and people forget it every generation. So that's the biggest thing. Just add lots of value to lots of people, and you'll make a lot of money.
And I think in the end, it's you. You start the business. I can get any and all advice of the world. In the end, I have to make the decision and kind of judge what is best and where I want to go. So
Yeah.
I think I'm a very important factor in the whole equation in the end, right?
Well, a common question. A common question that I hear is it better to go into a market that already exists and try and improve upon that, or is it better to sort of have a brand new idea and sort of push that?
It's easier if you've got a unique differentiator in an existing market than trying to educate the market. It can be nightmare to try and bend some of these.
Is that agreed across the panel? Like, really? I'm surprised by that. To have something unique and try and educate the market.
It's difficult because you're a one-man army, or 2 people or 3 people. Trying to change, unless you've got that startup seed applying for whatever reference line. And another important thing is a lot of people will say, sure, I'll order service from you, I'll buy your product. They have the best intentions in the world, but unfortunately the reality falls a lot short. So take a percentage of what you think of, everybody's saying, yeah, I'll buy it. And don't be upset if your friends can't deliver. They want you to succeed, but the reality of business is they have to be good prove it.
I mean, what you're getting at is the whole blue ocean versus red ocean thing. So are you going to fight in the bloody waters of competition, or are you going to try to find some new uncharted territory? And if you can find that uncharted territory, it's fantastic, but sometimes you have to at least start in the area where the waters are a little bit bloodier, because people understand how to buy that, like what you're saying. So if people aren't educated on how to buy it, now what you can sometimes do is you get in there and you sell them one thing, and what you're really selling them is something slightly different, and once you're in there, you can educate them on the better way, not to give you an advertisement, just as an example. We do training, but what we really do is we transform the way people think about security. But I can't sell that. But I can sell security training. So once I'm in the door, then they see what I do, and then they're like, oh, I get it now. And then then it kind of grows from there, and we get word of mouth.
I'm not saying don't be agile, don't be ineffective, because it's like if your business doesn't roll, it's stagnant. So always push the edge.
I've heard more than one person say that if you end up with the same business you set out to create, you failed, because you probably, you're being too inflexible. It always changes along the way. There's a question in the back.
Having different bad team members who dropped out and kind of like that question. Not grow, so that makes you grew. I think that's what I do that sort of thing. So what I want you to address is the downhill. You have staff, maybe as a partner or owner, you know things that you run
And so the question is, how do you get through the peaks and valleys, and how do you motivate during the down days? Anybody?
So that's an interesting question. I had one of those weeks last week, actually.
We're here for you.
Yeah, no, it's all good. It's all good now. No, sometimes just, things happen. People get a little bit out of sync. And the main thing is just if you stick close to your vision and know that your vision is bigger than that day, and you just kind of breathe through it and just, go and talk to your team and say, I find the most important thing is just be real with people. Just, here's what the issue is. How are we going to resolve it? How are we going to move forward? So what, now what? Kind of an attitude. And just because everything always gets better. Nothing stays like crap forever. So it always gets better, at least in my experience. So you got to just deal with the down days and try to just, again, I find if I stick with the far out vision of where am I trying to get to, then tomorrow comes and it's a little bit better than yesterday and it's all good.
Eugene, what do you think?
So I actually think that the larger point is worth spending some time on. Starting a company is very unpleasant, very time consuming, will generally damage a number of your close personal relationships, especially if you do it with your friends, and it is a huge sacrifice. The problem is that because we all want to hear good stories, and we ask people to come and talk about their successful startup and all the money they made and the recognition that they got as a result. Over time, all of the painful parts of the history get removed from all the successful startups, right? So I try not to do this when anybody asks me about the Data Power story, but over time it's like a bad hiking trip, right? Like when you're doing it, you're like, why am I doing this? I'm never going to do this again. This is the dumbest idea ever. I'm hungry, I'm miserable, and I think I'm going to die in this canyon. But then a month later, you're like, oh, that was nice exercise. I got in shape. And then a year later, like, oh, I want to do this again. And that's what startups are like. And the problem is that, what you hear about as the case histories are always these successes where everything was great. All the co-founders got along, the executive team was great, the customers always paid on time, the product always worked, everything was wonderful. And it's an ideal that seems to be, completely inaccessible to any mere mortal who's starting a company.
Customers ever pay on time?
No.
I have one. They get ahead. It's very scary. Like, what the hell am I doing with this check? Oh, right.
But anyway, but my point is that just remember that, and it's not worth it. It's not worth it. It's important to understand that it's a lot more work than working at someone else's company. It's a lot more nerve-wracking, and it is a big sacrifice. And people don't get paid for nothing. And if you want to go and achieve a lot of success, have a lot of control over your life, and potentially make millions of dollars at the end of it, you're going to sacrifice. And it's going to be a lot of down days, and it's got to be a lot of long days, and it wears on you. And I feel like people don't acknowledge that enough.
Yeah, all the days are long, really. One thing you just triggered when you were talking real quick. The thing about the money coming in, sometimes people they go out and generate a whole bunch of sales, but then they forget that you got to go collect that money. And if you've spent the money before you've collected it, you're gonna have some really bad days. So.
I'm actually glad what you're saying, Eugene. That's your experience as well. Don't feel that bad anymore. Oh, it's super interesting, right? I mean, my two co-founders, they're awesome, but you're getting really down to the bones. It's like you have super hard discussions because I have an opinion and they have an opinion, and sometimes they just diverge. And especially if it's about money in the end, where you really care, or how the product looks. I'm very passionate how my product looks, and my co-founder is as well. So we butt heads all the time, and it's just something I have to learn to deal with, and he has to learn to deal with me, and it's hard. Sometimes I feel like not working, but then the next day I'm like, hey, there's an immense opportunity here, and I do that evaluation. Yes, it is worth it, and I know where we're going, and then 2 days later it's the best day again, but it's definitely up and down.
I mean, one of the things is you talk about the team. If you've got a team, you're a leader. And leadership skills means keeping people motivated, sometimes bearing the burden on your shoulders to keep them in a place. But also, at the same time, don't sacrifice the team for one bad apple. I.e., one bad person is there. Don't sacrifice the whole team for that, because you're trying to protect the whole company. The other aspect is when you do get those bad days, you need a good support infrastructure. So your partner is important. They've got to support you. Don't start a business if your partner doesn't support you, because they will undermine you far easier than everything else. I'm lucky. I have a very understanding wife who puts up with me and also supports me when they see me through good and the bad. Also, your colleagues also read stuff about it, about how people go through business, about what it is. Some of it might be, oh yeah, I know that, but it helps build your confidence in where you are. Confidence is what gives you that strength to keep fighting forward. And but it has to come from within, and it is a very, very tough journey at times. And most of the time you're kind of there, but you're going to dive down, and then you're going to have that brief moment of happiness, and then you're back to normal and the normal issues. Like when you get that check, if you get that check ahead of time, don't spend it on the first day. That's like a boring accountant. Map the money out across the whole contract so that you don't spend it, because otherwise you'll run out of money before you finish the contract.
Another little trick related to the money. One thing we've done successfully on a number of occasions is actually get the customer to pay us ahead of time for something we hadn't even built yet. We had some, a number of companies, we had training courses that they wanted, and they knew we had the right skill sets to build it. So we just said, all right, we'll pay us half up front and pay us half when it's done, and that we basically funded product development through doing that. And that's actually helped bootstrap a lot. If you can do that, look for opportunities there.
Another trick is have social events where you get out of the office, you stop living in that dark hole, staring at the screen, take your team out of your group or whatever, go out and have a little spread. Don't go crazy, it's not .com time, okay?
Nowhere on chairs.
But at least go out and have a meal or go in a park. It's like everything. Go and do a get out. Sorry, yes.
It absolutely is.
So the question is about customers and how to get large customers and how to use those to get additional customers. Okay.
Yeah, you never choose the customer.
As soon as possible.
Yeah, exactly.
You target more than one. I mean, just go after them because before you start the business, go hunting.
Right. Everyone's approachable, even if they, you'd be surprised. Even CEOs in major companies, they're approachable if you are persistent enough. I heard a story recently about a guy that wanted to get in touch with the CEO of a major company, and he found out that the guy was flying to Boston from California, so he bought a plane ticket in first class so he could sit next to the guy for 2 hours or 6 hours or whatever. And he sat down and chatted with him. He actually got a deal out of it. So you got to be creative sometimes. But once you actually have them, you can leverage. It's a little tricky in security to leverage them sometimes because they don't always want to be named, especially early on. But what you can usually do is you can usually informally name them when you're talking to other people. You just can't put them on your website. But you can, if you're going for investors, absolutely you can talk about it because they're going to be potentially partnering in your company. So there is that kind of thing as well you can do.
I mean, sometimes you can put it in the contract. You say, well, we give you a little bit of a rebate, and you let us name you. I've done it in the past.
Good question. So the question is, how do you know when to get rid of customers that are deadwood customers?
If they're costing you more money than they're worth, if it's basically costing you money, you're not making anything from it, or if it's kind of like a break even and it's just causing you a lot of anxiety and stress, not worth it. Life's too short.
I think you have to set expectations from the beginning, right? I mean, I have 5 beta customers on right now. They're not paying anything. I mean, they wouldn't pay anything because it's sort of working, right? At some point I have to cut them loose or I have to do something with them. So I have to be upfront with them. Look, this is the deal. You get it till September and then you pay the regular, or I give you a rebate or something. But you have to have a story there and don't just let them live in the limbo somewhere because that's not fair to you nor to them.
I was just going to say, I have 2 rules for customers. When you're dealing with customers, don't lie to them, tell them the truth. And also set their expectations. Don't let them dream that they're in an artificial world. And if you can't have that conversation with that customer that says, look, I need to increase my rates because it's trouble again, and you don't have that relationship, you don't want that relationship.
You do?
I think as part of your general management process, what you want to be doing is, weekly or wherever your operational meeting happens, look through all of your prospects as well as the paying customers and decide how you're allocating resources against them. And through that, daily or weekly discipline, pretty quickly you're going to start seeing beta customers that have been in beta for 9 months, and the sales guy that's assigned to it claims they're going to order something any week now, and you start asking hard questions. Usually through that process, you can start at least removing resources from them, allocating resources to more qualified prospects, and over time, dropping them. And the same goes for a consulting relationship or anything else, where if you track the metrics, and then you have a very straightforward management process where you're constantly looking at it, not one customer at a time separately, not once a month, but weekly or maybe once every 2 weeks. Pretty quickly, it's going to become self-evident which are the good prospects and which are the bad prospects.
Okay. We're actually out of time. It's 4:30 now, or 4:25, sorry. We can certainly keep this going with additional questions if it's up to you guys for a few more minutes, and then there'll be another panel at 4:30 specifically on VCs and investors. So, any additional questions? Everybody knows how to start a company. Cool.
There's going to be some burning question out there.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.